Right, what I'll go over in this video is I'll go over briefly just kind of what trigonometry is and kind of how it can be used. So with trigonometry, you're always looking at a right angle triangle. Now, from Pythagoras, you will know that the longest side of a triangle, this side that is always opposite the right angle, that is the hypotenuse. And I'll label that H just to make it a little bit easier. Okay. Now let's say we've got an angle there. Okay. So trigonometry relates to angles in the triangle and the sides. Okay, and the lengths of the sides. So let's say we're working on a problem and that is the angle that we are given, or even the angle we're trying to work out. In relation to that angle, this side is opposite it. Okay, so it's a side that is opposite this angle. So that's what I would label that one. So that would be the opposite, or O. Now this side is known as the adjacent. So what adjacent means is next to. So this side is next to the angle, or is adjacent to. So that would be A. So when it comes to labeling a triangle, with relation to this angle here, this side is opposite it, this side is adjacent to it, and this side, the longest side, is always known as the hypotenuse. So if we had another triangle, I'll draw it exactly the same. So another right angle triangle, this side again would always be the hypotenuse. So it's got nothing to do with the angles. That one is always known as the hypotenuse. So let's say we're doing it in relation to this one. This time, this side is opposite my angle. This side, okay, isn't opposite my angle like it was before. This side is next to my angle. Okay, so when it comes to labeling the sides, this is kind of what I mean. It relates to the angle that you are looking at. Okay, if the angle is here, for instance, the one that's opposite it, labeled O, the opposite. On this one, if the angle's here, this one's opposite the angle. In the same way, this is the adjacent to this one, and this side is the adjacent here. Okay. Now, what trigonometry is about how these angles and these sides relate to each other. Okay, so with respect to that, on your calculator you have sine, cos and tan buttons. So they relate to the ratios of these sides kind of relating to each other with the angles. Okay, so the three ratios are sine, cos and tan. Okay. Now the sine ratio, so sine of any angle in a triangle, cos of any angle in a triangle, and tan of any angle in a triangle relate to different sides of the triangle itself. Okay. So if I rip this off, for example, so sine relates to the opposite over the hypotenuse. Okay, so if that was the angle, sine will relate as if you're working with these two. Okay, now the cos ratio relates to if you're working with the adjacent, I'm supposed to spell it correctly, the adjacent and the hypotenuse. Okay, so if you had that angle and you're working with these two, you would use the cos ratio. And the tan ratio is opposite over adjacent. Okay, so if you had that angle there, you're working with those two. Okay, that's how it works. Now, to remember kind of what ratio to kind of work with, it's why you always have to label the sides of a triangle first, which is why this is the first thing I showed you. So these are the ratios that you would use. So what I suggest you do is make a little note of them somewhere. Okay, those are the three that you're going to use. Now, in order to remember these, okay, there is a little kind of word that is used within maths to kind of relate to all of this. It relates to the S, the O, the H, the C, the A, the H, the T, the O, and the A. Okay, and that word, which I briefly mentioned, you would have seen in the other videos, is SOHCAHTOA. Okay, so we've got sine opposite hypotenuse, cos adjacent hypotenuse, and tan opposite and adjacent. Okay, so that's just how you remember kind of the formulas and kind of how they would look. Okay, so with an example, let's say we had a triangle like so. Let's say this side is 10 centimeters, and I want to find this one out, and this angle right here is 25 degrees. Okay, now these are the steps that I would always use to help solve one of these problems. So the first step that I always do is I label the sides. Okay, it doesn't matter what problem you were doing, whatever trigonometry problem you are working on, you would always label the sides first. Okay, so this side is the longest side of the triangle. That one will be the hypotenuse, or H. Now, if I angles here, this one over here is going to be my opposite. Okay, it's directly opposite my angle. This one here, the one that's next to it, that will be the adjacent. Okay, so labeling sides is always the first step that I do. Now the second step is deciding which formula I use. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly write down which formula, or it might also be, like I said in any other video you might watch, which formula, which ratio am I going to be using. Okay, that's where this SOHCAHTOA bit helps out, and we can use that to help us. Okay, so that SOHCAHTOA relates to all of the ratios, and with the labeling that helps us narrow it down to which one we can actually use. So I've got the O here, but I don't know what the O is. Okay, so that does absolutely nothing for me. I know my hypotenuse. Okay, so what I would do is I would tick the hypotenuse. Okay, I would tick the H's in SOHCAHTOA. The ratio I need has to relate to this side. Now the one I'm trying to find is the adjacent. Okay, so what I would do, my ratio, the formula I use, also has to relate to the adjacent. So that would be that one and that one. So these three relate to the sine formula or ratio. These two relate to the cos ratio. This one relates to the tan one. There's only one ratio that helps me with both the adjacent and the hypotenuse, and that would be the cos ratio. Okay, well, the cos ratio itself, my step 3 is write down the ratio that I'm actually going to be using. Okay, so I've got another piece of paper here. The cos ratio is the adjacent over hypotenuse. Okay, so cos of my angle is equal to my adjacent over my hypotenuse. Okay, so what I would do for step 4, after I've written that down, I now need to use that formula to help me. So cos my angle that I'm using here is 25. Okay, so cos of 25 is equal to my adjacent over my hypotenuse. Now I don't know my adjacent, that's x, and my hypotenuse is 10. Okay, so cos of 25 is equal to something over 10. Okay, and now all we have to do is just solve this formula to be able to work it out. The way I would solve it is I times both sides by 10. So I get 10 times cos 25 is equal to x. Okay, now all I've done there, and I'll go through the entire step-by-step guide first before I put this into my calculator. So the first thing I do is I label my sides. That one's the hypotenuse, this one's the adjacent, this side's opposite. Okay. Then I need to decide which formula or ratio I'm going to need to use. So I've got a value for hypotenuse, so I ticked my h's. I've then got trying to find my adjacent, so which one of these relates to the adjacent as well. Tan also does, but I've got nothing to do with my opposite there. Cos relates to both the adjacent and the hypotenuse, so I'm going to need to use that one. So this is the cos ratio. So cos 25, if I fill everything in, so cos 25 is equal to this side divided by that side. Okay, so if I times both sides by 10, okay, I get this x on its own, so I can work it out. And to work it out, all I do is I just type it onto a calculator. So 10 times cos 25 is 9.06. Okay, so 9.06 centimeters. And that is how I would figure out exactly what this length of the triangle is. So if I was to draw a triangle with that being 10, that 25 degrees, to draw my triangle accurately, I have to draw that with 9.06 centimeters. Okay, that is how you would use kind of trigonometry. These are the steps that I'd always suggest you follow. If you've got any kind of problem here, work through it using these steps slowly. You will come to terms with what you're actually doing and how to actually do it. Label the sides, use that to try and figure out which ratio you're using. Write down the ratio that you're going to need to use, substitute in the values that you've got, and hopefully become clear as to how to actually work it out. Okay, I do obviously have other videos of me going through different examples of this, but hopefully me going through it in a bit more detail will help. Okay, if I go back over what else I've got, we've got, those are all the different ratios, and that is what we use to remember them. And this is how I would label up the sides with respect to the other angles. So hopefully that's helped a bit more. Let me know if it hasn't, and I'll try my best to do something else to try and help you figure it out. Okay.